Good morning, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. It is indeed a pleasure to be here with you today, and we are going to walk through a bit of what my journey has been over the last several years, a bit of an island girl journey, if you will, from the shores of Trinidad and Tobago to the hallowed halls of MIT, and then baking and a few other things in between. So let's get started. So I'm going to talk about how an MIT engineer with a PhD in biomedical engineering abandoned the upper echelons of science to bake cake and cookies, and in the process built a pastry brand, and along the way became a two-time Food Network champion. So we're going to chat a little bit about the Sweet Lobby, my company in Washington, D.C., and how it came to be. It is indeed a most circuitous tale. We will talk about Souk, another company I started, another bakery. We will talk a bit about the why. We heard a lot about the why of what we do earlier today, and we'll hear a bit about my why in the context of Colossians 3:23 in particular. I am going to delve a bit more into that why and talk about a couple of my employees, a couple of profiles, to help you better understand why it is I do what I do. And then I'm going to issue a bit of a challenge, something that goes a little bit counter to what conventional wisdom might tell us about how we ought to run our companies. And then finally, we're going to end with a bit of an encouragement. So we're going to look at this young lady here, a rather intense-looking scientific type. We're going to see how she went from being this person to the far more glamorous in front of the camera character that we see here. We're going to walk you through what that journey looks like. And we'll start at the very beginning. We're going to start in Trinidad and Tobago, where I was born and raised. How many of you have been to Trinidad and Tobago? I know at least a couple of you have. Well, Trinidad and Tobago is the southernmost island in the Caribbean archipelago. We're a former British colony, right off the coast of Venezuela. It's a lot of what you would expect from a Caribbean island. Lots of wonderful, beautiful clear waters, white sands, palm trees. But what a lot of people don't necessarily recall is that Trinidad and Tobago is actually the only Caribbean island with oil and natural gas. And so that has enabled a fair bit of infrastructure to be built in the islands. And so I grew up really as a classic middle-class Trinidadian. What does middle-class mean in Trinidad and Tobago? It means that your parents probably both work, they probably own the house that they live in, that you live in, and they probably drive cars. And you have food on the table, you are relatively comfortable, but you don't necessarily have a lot saved up for a rainy day. I knew that growing up. I knew that I loved science, I wanted to be an engineer, and I knew that I wanted to go to this place called MIT, and I knew my parents didn't have money to get me there. So I had to craft a narrative for myself, and that began at a relatively early age. I was a nerd, an absolute nerd growing up. And here are some newspaper clippings from quite a few years ago. I will not tell you how long ago, but here I am receiving an award, actually a National Inventors Award from the Prime Minister at the time and some business magnates in Trinidad and Tobago. All of my trophies here being carried by my classmates, and these are all front page pictures in the newspaper of the day, and then yet another award. So this was my life, crafting a narrative that would make me seem acceptable to a place like MIT. And here I am, enjoying, basking in the glow of all my trophies, surrounded by my friends. MIT, here I come. So with good grades and an arsenal of accolades, I made it to MIT. Applied, got in, and MIT was nerd nirvana. It was exactly what I'd imagined, and then some. It was a fantastic experience. I really had the opportunity to, of course, not only take amazing classes, but work in phenomenal labs and really be a part of cutting-edge research, and I absolutely loved it. at MIT, I realized that this sort of kooky, nerdy science person could do more than just science. What did you know? MIT, you could study languages and literature. And so I decided to double major in French language and literature. I had long enjoyed French, languages really, but French in particular. And in the British system that we have in Trinidad and Tobago, you tend to have to focus pretty early. So I decided, you know what, I could probably pick up French later on, but I probably can't pick up physics in my 30s. So decided to focus on engineering. But in my sophomore year of college, had the opportunity to go to Paris to study. And that is where this nerdy engineer with no interest whatsoever in baking or cooking became captivated, mesmerized by the beauty, the craft of French pastry. So flash forward a few years later, graduated from MIT, married my husband 6 days after we graduated from college, and moved to the Bay Area, in fact, where I worked in the medical device industry for a number of years. And this was my very first project, straight out of college. I worked with this amazing team where we developed the first FDA-approved device for carotid stenting. There were a lot of stents at the time, but not specifically for the carotid artery. So we worked on what's called a self-expanding stent, and this was my very first patent. Very much enjoyed my time in industry, but hey, I had my eyes set on my career, which was absolutely going to be as a professor in a university somewhere in the US, and you need a PhD for that. So then is when I moved back to the East Coast to start my PhD at Johns Hopkins, armed also with a couple of really prestigious fellowships that I had won, and started my PhD work at Hopkins. My focus at Hopkins was in the eye, tissue engineering of the eye. Anybody know what tissue engineering is? It is essentially rebuilding tissue. And for my PhD work, I was focused primarily on the cornea, so the front of the eye, rebuilding those layers using a combination of biomaterials and stem cells, or precursor cells. For my postdoctoral work, after graduating, my focus was actually on the retina, so the light-sensing portion of the eye, and again, using biomaterials and precursor cells in order to rebuild, in order to repair damaged retinas. And here's that photo again. I'm actually here with my mentor, Dr. Anand Swarup, absolutely fabulous. He took this engineer into a very sort of neurogenetics-focused lab so that we could expand the program in tissue engineering in particular. And what I'm holding here is actually a thin collagen film that was made with by our partners in Japan. I'd spent some time working in Japan helping to develop this material, and had the opportunity now to apply it for the very first time to retinal tissue engineering. It was an amazing time. June 11th, 2011 was an important day. One, because we celebrated our 13th wedding anniversary, and they're very young people there. I'm not going to tell you how young we were, but moving on from that. June 11th, 2011 was also the day that my brother and I opened the Sweet Lobby. My brother, by the way, also an MIT trained chemical engineer. He had just finished his chemical engineering degree and had spent a couple of years actually teaching kids science. And he was on his way, actually, to Trinidad to work with the oil giant BP. And I called him up. There was a spill that had just occurred, that BP was in a bit of a mess. And I said, you want to go work for BP in Trinidad? You should come and bake cupcakes with me in DC. And he said, sure, of course. And so I convinced him to come down to DC, and we spent a year together working on this, and he's since gone on to do wonderful things. In fact, he is actually in the Bay Area himself, now at Google, he and his wife. Now, the Sweet Lobby was an interesting place, is an interesting place. It came about because my husband and I were driving around our Capitol Hill neighborhood and saw that there was this spot open, and I turned to him and I said, hey, you think I should open a bakery? He's like, yeah, he is the ultimate enabler. Find yourself an enabler. In maybe 6 weeks, after we opened the sweet lobby, my brother, who I like to say is very, very vain, please don't tell him I said that, but he's very vain, loves himself. He's like, we should go on TV. We should be in reality TV. It's so for us. And I was like, no, Timothy, there's no way. I don't want to do the reality TV thing. Yes, we should. He prevailed upon me and forced me to submit an audition video, and within about half an hour, we were casted. The producers were like, what? Two MIT engineers who are black from Trinidad, they do, what? They're going to be perfect competitors. And literally, we were casted in about half an hour. They saw the video and immediately called us. And we won. We won Cupcake Wars. It was a blast and really provided the kind of exposure that, frankly, you cannot pay for, certainly not as a startup, and really allowed us to have some unique opportunities. One of those opportunities was the ability to get into wholesale. We have a number of larger clients, and this really started just before this. In February of 2015 is when I opened Souk. Souk's the Arabic word for marketplace. Now, we are a globally inspired, Souk is a globally inspired marketplace and bakery. But really, it's a front. It's actually a front for a wholesale manufacturing operation, which exists back of house and downstairs of Souk. And it has been an incredible journey. So what do we do with these companies, the Sweet Lobby and Souk? We craft artisanal items that are French-inspired pastries for wholesale and retail. So just to give you a sense of who we really are at the intersection of three things: of craft, whether you're talking about a beautifully made, beautiful laminated croissant or a finely crafted cup of coffee. We're at the intersection of craft, community. It's who we are. It's the communities that we serve. It is the community that makes up our team, and even that wider community of the wholesale partners that we have. And finally, we're about culture. We're a way of life in many ways. It's about coming in, having a Queen Amman, a cannelé pastry in the morning. It's stopping by again for lunch, and then maybe coming in before dinner time and picking up a beautiful box of macarons to take to your host that you're having dinner with. What are the products that we do? What's the company like? We have about 30 employees now and 2 retail locations on Capitol Hill, 2 production facilities, a number of product lines. We are about 85% wholesale and about 15% retail. Here is a snapshot of some of the popular products at the Sweet Lobby. Obviously, you have the very well-known cupcakes and certainly some French macarons as well, and a few other items that aren't pictured here. At Souk, our focus is viennoiserie. It's on breakfast pastries. So here you can see there's croissants, turnovers, tarts, cookies, Queen Amman, and so on. I could leave this picture up forever and just stare at it. And I get the question a lot about, so how do you manage to control your intake? I say, you don't have to control, you just invest in spandex. It really works. So what is a macaron anyway? What's a French macaron? So they are very delicate almond meringue-based cookies that encase a buttercream or ganache, some type of filling. And so this is the basic anatomy of a macaron. We're talking from a science perspective. Let's get into some anatomy here. So they're almond meringue cookies that are essentially made from egg whites, almond flour, and sugar. And then this one is our dark chocolate macaron. It's got a chocolate ganache encased in the 2 shells. In 2018, we sold 2 million of these. Our production capacity right now is just around about 10,000 per day, 10,000 pieces per day, and this is our essential sort of wholesale unit. It's a case, if you were, of about 32 pieces, and these ship all around the world. There's an interesting story about these that I will tell you about when we have some more time together. But essentially, the story behind this packaging has so much to do with my engineering background, and particularly my days as an engineer in California, and designing products and having to design packaging well before your product is even a reality. And that's one of the things that enabled us to really get into wholesale as quickly as we were able to. So that brings us to Colossians 3:23. The question that I get all of the time is, so you went to MIT? you studied engineering, you have your PhD, and you do what? What did your parents say? All of the time. And, I have two answers to that. One is that my parents have way too much confidence in me. They think that I could do whatever I want to do, which is a little bit crazy. But the other answer is, ultimately, why are we here? We're here to bring glory to God. And whatever we do, our duty is to do it heartily, as for the Lord, rather than for men, knowing that it is from the Lord we receive the inheritance, because it is Christ whom we serve. So that, in many ways, is my why. And another big part of my why is our team. What I loved about science is the opportunity to mentor, to encourage that new crop of scientists, that new crop of young people to take on, to pass the baton. And in many ways, that is what entrepreneurship is, and that is one of the things I love about it. So I thought I'd profile a couple of our employees who really represent that. Someone who had absolutely no background in baking and pastry and came with a desire to learn and a lot of energy, and has really been able to make tremendous strides. Here is one. He's a senior macaron baker. What does he do? He makes his batters, he operates machinery, he bakes a product. He's been with us for 4 years. He never made a macaron before. In fact, he had never even worked in pastry before joining us. He came eager to learn, and now he is the one who those 2 million macarons passed through, almost every single one. Almost everyone without exception. Why? Because he showed that he was dedicated, committed, wanted to learn. Let's look at this wonderful lady here. She is one of our senior production associates. She's been with us for 5.5 years. She came from the semiconductor industry. Never worked professionally in baking before. This is what I love about an entrepreneur, being an entrepreneur. It gives you the opportunity to not just provide meaningful work, but to change the course drastically of people's lives. And here I want to introduce really quickly, in the time that remains, this idea of virtue-based hiring. What is it? There are a couple of definitions, but I like to think of it as hiring that's guided by virtuous principles that may potentially conflict with traditional business rationale. It's this idea of grace, and how do we as Christians apply grace in the way in which we conduct our business? What's grace? We know what it is. We know it's free and unmerited favor. We know it's dealing kindly with others when it's not deserved. And we as Christians know a thing or two about grace, don't we? And so this is just a little bit about how we hire. I won't dwell on this too long. I think the process is similar to others. But there are two key radical principles that we apply. Firstly is that we don't necessarily strive to hire people who are by nature virtuous, because can you really tell if someone is virtuous from an interview in the first place? If we could, that would be a good goal, but we truly can't. So what we opt to do is to hire with grace and provide a framework for virtuous conduct at work. And our rationale here is, as Christians, we are accepted into Christ's family, not because of what we have done, but because of what he has done for us. And instead of looking for moral perfection, what we look for instead is our ability to extend grace and provide a framework for this virtuous conduct. This is the second principle, and has to do with discipline. Understand that all actions must have consequences. But if we're being honest, how many of us have been dealt with kindly, have been blessed way beyond we deserve? Why not consider grace when it's in our power to do so? And so the bottom line is sometimes we do have to terminate, right? In fact, I very recently had to, very sadly, terminate 2 employees. But we have to understand that grace, it might be free, but it isn't cheap. It's not necessarily appreciated by everyone, and sometimes we do have to terminate. So, in conclusion, why should you start your own hospitality food-based business? Because you go from being very demure and very modest-looking with no makeup on to very glamorous. Note the hair, note the makeup, note the cameras, and the beautiful French macaron behind. This is reason alone. Your kids will see your photo in Whole Foods and think that you have arrived. Reason number 2. Reason number 3, you get to compete on national TV on the Food Network against Michelin-starred, James Beard award-winning chefs, and maybe you might even win, become a champion. And I'm going to leave you with this. The AEI shot this amazing documentary not too long ago. I was fortunate to be featured along with 2 other entrepreneurs. If you're interested, do check it out. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. And finally, for a time of reflection, some fall pastries. Enjoy.